Hello, YouTube. The most famous of the Western prophets is undoubtedly Nostradamus, who based many of his prophecies on biblical end-of-world omens, such as locust plagues and floods. But in the year 1557, at the same time that Nostradamus was making his predictions, another scholar, Conrad Lycosthenes, published a comprehensive anthology of the history of strange, wonderful, and terrifying events and creatures from Adam and Eve times until his own time. Prodigorium ac ostentorum chronicon ab exordio mondi usque ad hac nostra tempora, Chronicle of Omens and Portents, from the beginning of the world up to this our present times, was published in Basel in 1557. It is full of wonderful woodcut illustrations of mysterious signs and portents or omens, interchangeably monsters and natural phenomena, a massive anthology of omens, portents, and prodigies, compiled by the Swiss philosopher, theologian, and professor of grammar, Conrad Lycosthenes, who lived in the years 1518 to 1561. Reports of strange phenomena and creatures from foreign lands had long filtered back to Europeans, who then proceeded to populate the blank spaces on maps with them. They also flourished as woodcuts and engravings in many books from the time, some of which were reused in several different volumes owing to the cost of production. The interest of Protestant authors and theologians of the 16th century in miracles and signs culminated in the appearance of one of the greatest book projects, Conrad or Conradus Lycosthenes, born Conrad Wulfhart, a Basel priest, teacher, and philosopher, spent over 20 years collecting information from chronicles, books, and so-called flying leaves about all kinds of miracles from biblical times, like I said, to the time of writing the manuscript, and he was very diligent. The final version of this work, published in Basel in 1557, contains about 1,500 descriptions of various anomalies and over 700 engravings. Some of the drawings were standard and repeated, but many were made in one copy, quite accurately copying the images in the original sources. This project was made possible not least because Conrad was a familiar face among the Basel publishers and printers. Basically, he was a happening man. He was married to Christiane Herbster, the sister of publisher Johann Herbster, who successfully combined business with a professorship at the University of Basel. Herbster, better known to us by the Latinized surname Oporinus, in accordance with fashion of the time, taught Greek and Latin there, and Conrad Wulfhart, who became Lycosthenes in the Latin manner. Yes, he taught grammar and dialectic. While in the year 1545, the 27-year-old Lycosthenes became a priest of the St. Nicholas Church, but he did not lose interest in science. It was then that his books on classical Greco-Roman antiquity began to be published. Conrad was one of the first to realize that Julius Obsequens' manuscript on Roman miracles, preserved in a single copy with gaps, without beginning or end, was an abridged extract from Titus Livius' incomplete work, The History of Rome, from the founding of the city. All this made it possible to partially understand what was contained in the lost books of Livius, and conversely, to restore a number of gaps in the manuscript of Observance. The edition of the Observance prepared by Lycosthenes, with additions and comments, turned out to be so good that it printed without any changes for 4 centuries. Now, the fame that fell to the lot of the Chronicle of Omens and Portents created by him turned out to be even longer. Yes, and it was published in Basel in Switzerland when Nostradamus was in the very midst of writing his prophecies. Much of Lycosthenes' chronicle was subsequently translated into contemporary English by Dr. Stephen Batman in his hugely popular The Doom, Warning to All Men of the year 1581, which supplemented it with further reports gleaned by Batman mainly from England, especially during the 24 years that followed the publication of Lycosthenes' book. This book became a source of inspiration for many imitators, and the plots and drawings from it are still used today. Chronicle was translated into almost all European languages, including Russian, and its abbreviated versions were printed for 3 centuries in a row in different countries. For example, excerpts from Lycosthenes are found in many Russian manuscripts. Now, this is according to Mikhail Gerstein, Russia's most knowledgeable ufologist, experienced field researcher, and author of many books. Perhaps the chronicle would have turned out to be even thicker, but in the process of writing it, Conrad became seriously ill. The right side of his body remained paralyzed, but Lycosthenes learned to write with his left hand and finish his work. It is because of this that the last part of the work, devoted to miracles during the author's lifetime, turned out to be very brief, although he saw a lot with his own eyes. The popularity of his book was not least due to the fact that the author did not intimidate readers with too much the coming last judgment, and attributed a variety of stories to miracles, where everyone could find something to their taste. The chronicle described natural disasters, unusual animals, deformities and pathologies, strange incidents, witchcraft and magic. A considerable part of it was devoted to the unusual phenomena in the sky. Many of them are now easily identified as meteorite falls, halos, or northern lights. Others could be fictional for political and religious purposes and uncritical selected by Conrad, but some descriptions are still of considerable interest. He acknowledged that many of the events in Chronicle have natural causes, but warned that it is often difficult for the human mind to distinguish the natural from the supernatural. What matters is the consequences which cause such events, not their exact causes. Whatever they may be, signs and wonders were created by God for our enlightenment. Unfortunately, Latin is not prestigious to learn in our age, and all kinds of groups look at it as an old language for their political reasons, which will not go into it. And even for modern authors trying to quote Lycosthenes, they constantly make more or less blunders. Well, Mikhail Gerstein tried to compare what he understood from the Latin text with the German and Old English translations, but even after that, he is not sure of the perfect accuracy of the citation. In addition, the drawings in the book do not always correspond to the text, and relying on them can be dangerous. The artist did not draw them from nature, but tried to depict what was described, not being great experts in Latin. The dates in the book are not always clear. Lycosthenes often refers to church holidays or uses the ancient Roman calendar along with the Julian calendar, and not only when describing events in Rome before the birth of Christ. For example, on June 19, 1550, the inhabitants of Saxony from Trebinium near Wittenberg, a stronghold of the Muses and good scholarship, so many signs. A large deer appeared in the sky surrounded by 2 armies fighting with great noise. Blood was pouring onto the ground like rain. The sun looked horribly distorted, as if it had split in 2, and one of the parts seemed to tilt down towards the earth. 12 days before the July calends, June 21, a bloody sword and a siege engine on wheels were seen in the sky in Wittenberg. As Job Finzel writes, in the same place on the feast of Saint The Baptist, that would be June 24. Between the 6th and 9th hours, a black cross with curved hook-like dart in its front part was visible in the clear sky. Even if we discard all the dubious stories, there is still a lot of news in Lycosthenes' books about strange events that have not been explained. For example, on January 16, 1537, in Franconia, between Papenburg and the Thuringian forest, a star of amazing magnitude was seen. Gradually expanding, it turned into a white circle. Flames came down for its due to strong winds. Falling to the ground and burned only objects that usually do not burn. Spearheads, stirrups, horse mouthpieces, etc. But it did not damage either buildings or people. What exactly burned or melted in the metal remains to be guessed, but it was not the classic wildfire coming from the sky and setting fire to everything in its path, trees, houses, crops, and witnesses who did not have time to escape. In that chronicle, everyone can find stories to their liking. Doctors will read with interest stories about deformities, diseases, and unusual births. Astronomers will read about comets, meteorite falls, and supernova outbreaks. Meteorologists will be interested in stories about floods, thunderstorms, lightning strikes, and false suns. Geologists will find many stories there about earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the yawning earth. Church historians talk about religious miracles, healings, the actions of otherworldly forces, and so on. Ufologists can also look for reports of mysterious objects, although there are not that very many of them. The most famous image you see there is of a comet seen over Arabia in 1479, which resembles a space rocket. This illustration is quite popular among UFO enthusiasts, those that know about it. I mean, a lot of the so-called experts have no clue about this. Ensuring that Lycosthenes' name, although not as well known as Nostradamus, hasn't completely faded into obscurity. Lycosthenes was mainly interested in visions and colorful paintings in the sky, rather than flying balls and discs, which are difficult to interpret religiously. However, if desired, such messages were linked to Christianity, as in 1143, when fireballs were visible in various places, which then disappeared in some other part of the sky. Many interpreted them as angelic forces encouraging people to crusade. That's what researchers, at least some think. One can only regret that Lycosthenes' book, which is in demand even to this day among those who know about it, has not been translated into modern Russian or English by experts in medieval Latin and provided with the necessary comments. In some cases, the sources of stories from it are easily recognizable and accessible to researchers who can cite them in full or note existing discrepancies. For example, the author writes that on July 24, 1554, near the Rhine, in the area known as Upper Palatinate, at 10 p.m., two men in full armor appeared in the air towards the Bohemian forest, one significantly taller than the other. He had a bright shining star on his chest and a flaming sword in his hand, just like the smaller one. They began to fight fiercely, and finally the smaller one was defeated and could not move, and the victor sat down in a chair without ceasing to threaten with the sword in his hand the one who was lying at his feet, as if at any moment he could strike him. In the end, both of them disappeared, just like Star Wars. The original of this flying leaf, from which Lycosthenes borrowed the story, was preserved in the collection of the Swiss priest Johann Wick. The text is more detailed and full of details, but Old German is more difficult for Gerstein than Latin. The help of experts here would obviously not be unwelcome. If there are scientists who can reevaluate the old collections of signs or omens and wonders or portents. Perhaps their efforts will help identify unexplored aspects of the world around us and point out the existence of problems awaiting solution. Lightning was once a miracle, but the development of science has removed the veil of mystery from it. The same fate awaits other miracles that have not yet been solved. And that's what Mikhail Gerstein believes, and him I trust, because he's a very knowledgeable person. And I'll bring you more of his research and also more of my own research pertaining to interesting medieval depictions of the strange things they see in the sky. And you can find videos on the subject in my channel, like, for example, the Kingdom of Georgia in the Middle Ages and other parts of Eurasia. So if you can support my research, please kindly do so through the links you'll find in description to this video. Please tell others about my work, and thank you for your attention.